Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a look at the new Masters of the Universe Revelation He-Man figure. He-Man, like all the other Revelation figures, is part of the greater Masterverse line of toys from Mattel. And this figure aims to reimagine He-Man to fit his appearance in the new Revelation cartoon on Netflix. So he's not a one-for-one recreation of the classic design. There are some stylistic changes that were made to the character to suit the aesthetic of the new cartoon and possibly also to skirt some legal issues. And I might touch on that here during the review. So if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at He-Man's packaging, then we'll open it up. We'll get a look at He-Man himself, check out all his posability, his accessories, all that fun stuff. Naturally, I'll do some group shots and comparisons today, and then at the end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So He-Man comes in what is the standard packaging for your normal size Masterverse figures. At least so far, we've only had them released under, the Revelation header, so who knows how it might differ once they, presumably start branching out into other, series, continuities, whatever the plan is there. You can see it's got all the branding here, got the MOTU Revelation thing, his name, He-Man, Netflix, Masterverse, all that. Calls out 30 points of articulation, which I believe is the standard for all these, at least, the standard size guys. They all kind of use the same framework when it comes to articulation, which is cool. And of course, you can see this big old window here that shows off He-Man. You got the figure itself, you have his Sword of Power, his classic shield, like his original toy has, which is neat, and then 2 alternate hands just to allow him to, hold different accessories and stuff. Now, if we turn the box over to the side, you can see his name in big letters, He-Man, along with the title he's given all the way back from the original Masters of the Universe toy line, Most Powerful Man in the Universe. So, longtime He-Man fans will recognize that call out. Then on the back, you get this really nice artwork that they've done, and it's kind of a blend of the classic illustration style of the MOTU toys, but also, an update to reflect the art style of the Revelation cartoon, so there's a little bit of both in there, including his more youthful-looking face from Revelation. Then here, we get his name and title again at the top, and then a big, long thing of flavor text. So that reads, Defender of Castle Grayskull, Protector of the Planet Eternia, and Guardian of the entire universe. Well, that's a big burden, huh? There is nobody stronger, faster, or braver than the mighty He-Man. He is quite simply the most powerful man in the universe, past, present, or future. Does that mean he's more powerful than the other Grayskull heroes, I guess? I don't know. A vessel for the mysterious power of Grayskull, He-Man inspires the heroes of Eternia to fight the forces of evil. Without He-Man, Eternia, and the universe would be doomed. So, not gonna lie, that's not my favorite write-up. It's just basically just them gassing up He-Man the whole time, which, I get it, he's powerful, but it's not the most interesting thing. That's like how a 7-year-old describes this new superhero he just showed. It's like, he's the most strongestest and the most bestest one ever, and he's invincible, and he has no weaknesses, and he's super cool. That's kind of how this reads to me, like a kid wrote this, so gonna say not the best write-up. Then down here toward the bottom, you get your cross-sells, you get He-Man himself, which I never understood that. Why cross-sell the figure whose box you're putting the cross? I don't know, whatever. Mossman, Skeletor, and Evelyn. So 3 of your most, famous and basic characters, including this first wave, and then Mossman, who is a much lesser-known character overall, but plays a big part, within the first 5 episodes of the series. So, his inclusion here is pretty warranted. Plus, trying to get an original Mossman figure is going to cost you probably your soul. He hasn't been re-released to my knowledge, and he goes for a lot of money. All right, and then here on the side, you get a different bit of artwork of He-Man. This one looking a little more mature, a little more classic He-Man style, which I like a lot more than the kind of baby-faced take on him. Which, speaking of, if you look at the stock photo of his face, you can tell this is clearly like a prototype, and it's sculpted a little better, a little, hand-painted, nice looking. Because the actual face we get, it's kind of goofy looking. He's smiling a lot more than he is on the prototype picture, or at least, that's the way it looks. And I'm not really crazy about a smiling He-Man. Like, He-Man toys aren't supposed to smile. They're supposed to look serious and tough. I don't like it. He's just always got this kind of doofy smile on his face. So I'm definitely taking points off for that. Smiling He-Man is a no-go. Don't like the smile. All right, but we should go ahead and open this guy up and really look at him before I judge him too harshly. Got to see how much this toy really redeems the goofy smile face going on. Okay, now we get to see He-Man out of the package, and I've got his accessories laid out at his feet. Got the power sword, his shield, and 2 extra hands. Now this open hand is actually the one he comes packaged with for his left arm there. But based on the way I want the video to flow, I'm going to go ahead and have him in this configuration first. So he has this nice like closed fist hand that you can imagine he's punching someone, which is very evocative of that original opening title sequence where He-Man just kind of socks the camera. And then this here is one of his weapon-wielding hands. So naturally, if you'd like, you can put his power sword in that hand. One thing I want to point out, unlike the old vintage or Origins figure, his harness doesn't have like a little slot to put a weapon into, whether it's his axe or his sword. This guy doesn't come with an axe anyway. So he does lose some of that intended storage. However, you can very easily just go ahead and like slide the power sword down behind it. And it actually looks pretty good, even though there's not an actual, little loop there for it. I'd say it works. I think that's more than serviceable for, storing his weapon. It's not too tight. It's not going to bend the sword or anything. So that is an option you have. Or, like we said, you could just have him wield it. Just kind of slide it into his hand here. Pommel's a bit fat, so you may have to struggle a little getting it in there, but it'll go. So, there, now you can have him wielding his iconic sword like this. And I think he looks okay. My one complaint with the way he looks, and this is something I've seen a lot of people share, the face. The face, it feels off, almost maybe a little too pretty boy for, what's supposed to be this very fearsome warrior. Now, I get it, He-Man is a good-natured, hero, but there's something about it that just doesn't feel right. I don't know if like the jaw is not square enough, because he does have a very square jaw in the new cartoon. This is supposed to be based on the new cartoon. The face might be too small. I feel like the head's a little bit too small. Honestly, it could stand to be about maybe 25% bigger. That's another complaint I've heard too, is some people think the head's too small, and I'm kind of inclined to agree with that. I think it should be a little bit bigger and just a little, I know this might sound cliche, but a little more masculine looking. And that's only because that's how he looks in the show. So they're not doing a very good job recreating his on-screen appearance. Now, maybe, we know how these things work with like toys licensed around movies or TV shows. Usually the toys hit before the show does. So this could have been based on like, earlier concept work for He-Man. Maybe his face looked a little bit different then. I'm not really sure, but it does feel off. He looks more like a Ken doll in his face than he does He-Man. But bashing his looks aside, we can check out his posability. He does have the double ball jointed neck. He's got the universal shoulders, which is nice. And they will actually go all the way down. You just got to kind of push them a little harder as you get toward the bottom. So be wary of that. If you get to about this point, because a lot of the Revelations figures, they kind of stop here as far as bringing the arms down, and you push and it really feels like you might break the arm, it's probably not worth it to keep going, because some of these, the QC on them is weird. You may actually break the shoulder or the bicep. Speaking of bicep, we have a nice bicep swivel. You can see we got double bend elbows here, which is nice. Universal wrists that can rotate and hinge a bit on their pegs. He's got that ball jointed like upper torso area, which makes for some really nice posing. Got a full waist swivel. Can go 360 if you want it to. Universal hips. That it's interesting when you lift the hips up and you bring them down, they want to kind of stick outward. You have to kind of like push in and swing it back inward to get it to like click back into a more neutral position. You've got that thigh swivel, double bend knees, that weird boot swivel that MOTU toys get, ankle rocking, and then that like odd ankle rotation that again is just like a thing with MOTU figures. So, like I've said about other Revelations toys, He's kind of just like a souped-up Origins figure, right? He's got all the same articulation and then adds a little bit more to, justify the $5 or $7 price hike, depending on where you buy him. So functionally, I think he's great. One other thing I want to point out, a lot of people that might not have had the original He-Man toys, the vintage ones, may have found his little buckler thing to be a bit odd, because they're probably used to seeing He-Man with two of just these like wristbands on. This buckler piece is actually based on the original toy, the old vintage He-Man toys, and not just He-Man himself, but like pretty much any figure based on his body type. They didn't have the two wristbands. He had something like this on his left arm. Now, it didn't stand out very well because they didn't actually color him in back then. His wrist, wear was flesh tone like the rest of him, so it wasn't insanely obvious to anyone not, really getting a good look at the toy. So that is one thing that Revelation, kind of retconned a little bit from the old cartoon that I'm actually in favor of. I like the callback to the old toy. And in fact, there are several places in Revelation where they seem to favor either like the vintage toy appearance, or they might even mix in a little bit of influence from like the 2000X cartoon. And I gotta say, I'm actually a fan of that approach. I feel the same way when it comes to Transformers, of taking what works best and then kind of combining that, right? Like when they do an update to a G1 character, the best answer isn't usually like strictly vintage toy look or strictly cartoon look. It's usually somewhere in the middle, right? Take the best of both worlds. And I feel like that's something the designers of Revelation did very well for, the character's classic appearances anyway. Doesn't really apply to any like updated looks or anything, because that's all new stuff. So, honestly, overall, I like the way he looks. I'd say he looks like 90% good. Could have been 100 if the face was better. All right. So we have all these other accessories here, right? The other hands. So let's go ahead and swap some things out. I'll give him his weapon-wielding hand here. Pull this out. Now this will actually slide off. So if you want to take it off for customizing, or you don't like it, it just comes right off as soon as you detach one of the hands. So that's pretty cool. But I'm going to give him his more classic open hand, right? Because the original He-Man, he had a weapon-wielding hand on his right arm and then just an open hand on his left arm, which, despite being open and not something you'd expect to hold an accessory, actually works better for wielding a shield than a weapon-wielding hand did anyway. And that carries true here. So you get him holding the sword in his right hand like he normally does, and then you get the shield, and because, he's got a pretty good size bit of plate wear here on his forearm, you get like a thicker area here up top. So that slides over that a bit, and then the thinner area just slides over the fingertips, and you get it on here like that. And it just emulates his original shield. And now this is a nice touch too, and this is also something from the vintage toy, because I don't think He-Man was ever shown using a shield in the show. Or if he did, it wasn't shown very regularly. It was typically just him and his sword. So again, another good callback from the old toy. I like that. Another thing I like about the new show is, some of the touches they made between Adam and He-Man. They made Adam more, diminutive, something a little bit closer to his 2000X appearance, but really how the original concept was supposed to be anyway. Adam wasn't supposed to be a big hulking brute like He-Man. The only reason he was in the old cartoon is because they used the same actor for both, and they, rotoscoped the whole thing. So that's the only reason Adam was so muscle-bound anyway. I also like the fact that his hair changes between appearances, right? I was never a fan of Adam's real frou-frou haircut in the old 80s cartoon. Looked a little weird, but it looked even weirder on He-Man. Like, this is a battle-hardened warrior, and the man looks like he has a pimp perm. So, I'm good with that change too. I like how they put it a little bit closer to, the vintage look of He-Man, rather than this more, well-kept appearance that you wouldn't expect to see on a Conan-inspired character. So overall, as far as, his appearance update and everything, I think it's a win. Now, to see how the design has evolved since the older toy line, we have the Origins He-Man here. And the first thing that becomes very apparent is just how cartoony the proportions on the old vintage or Origins toys are. Right? When he's paired with someone that's shaped a little more like a real human, you see that the old toys were very top-heavy. Now, amongst themselves, it's not always that obvious that they're built like the old WWE toys with like massive upper bodies. But when you can see him here compared to this He-Man, yeah, they're kind of short stacks. And honestly, like, his torso is not much shorter than his. If he had more proportional legs, he'd be a lot taller. He'd be much closer to this guy. So it is interesting. But you can see here some changes. They're obviously both based on the same design, but there's some reworks here. One, the symbol on his harness. On the old toy, it was more cross-like. It looked a lot like a Templar cross, and that was changed for the reboot. Now, I don't think it was so much like a censorship thing as it was a legality thing. Like, Filmation still owns rights to the old He-Man cartoon, and I think it was a matter of making everything, what do they say, like 20% different in order to not like fall afoul of copyright. I think the, H thing on his chest is just one of those, right? They have to make them look distinct enough from the cartoon, which is probably why they used a lot of the toy-inspired looks. They have to make them look distinct enough from the cartoon to not, get in trouble with Filmation. So I think that's why they made that change, because even though the cross design was used on the vintage toy, it was also used in the old cartoon. So I think that's one reason they really, went for that. You also notice, like I said, the whole buckler thing or wrist guard thing. Now, the Origins toys actually do differ from the vintage toys a bit in that they actually use the cartoon-inspired 2 wristbands instead of having this like wrist guard here for his shield arm. Normally, if we were looking at the original He-Man toy, he would have something closer to what he has. So that's probably another reason that change was made. Again, cartoon. You can also see some color differences. He trades out the bright oranges on his belt and wrist attire for more of a gold color. His loincloth is done in a much darker brown and is much longer too, much more like free-flowing looking instead of looking more like a wrestler's little Speedo thing. And then the boots get a bit of a color change too, going from having yellow accents around the cuffs there to more of a dark brown. So it looks similar enough to where it's immediately obvious who this character is, right? There's no looking at this guy and not realizing that's He-Man. But they do make some interesting changes. One, for more realism, because that's the style that the new cartoon is drawn in. But also, two, to make them legally distinct from Filmation series. Which is, it's a tricky game to play, right? When you're trying to claim continuity with an old show, but you can't look exactly like the old show. There's gonna have to be some retconning there. Now, I will say, overall, the new cartoon does a pretty good job of staying in continuity with the 80s series. There are some hiccups, specifically around like Teela's origin and all that, and Duncan's relationship with the Sorceress. If you've seen the whole season, I won't spoil it, but it definitely contradicts the details of how all that went down based on the show. So just know that it's not 100% perfectly in continuity with the old TV show. And this completes our look at MOTU Revelation He-Man. Overall, I'm pleased with this figure. I think it's a pretty good, first effort. The things I would change about it, personally, one is the head sculpt. I think it needs to be a little bit bigger, and the face needs to be more in line with how he looks in the cartoon. The other thing, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but you'll notice he doesn't come with an axe like the original toy did. He just has the sword and shield. Now, I would love for him to have that axe and for him to have an actual little holster bit on the back of his harness to, put one of his weapons away. I'm guessing that just wasn't in the budget for this like core assortment for Revelation, because when you look at what he comes with, it is about on par with the other toys in the first wave, so the axe may have just been a bit too much for that $20 or so price point. It's a shame, I would have liked it, but to be fair, he's not shown to have an axe in the new series, so, it is screen accurate, I guess. But if I had my way, he should totally have that axe. But I won't hold that against this toy too much. Really, it's more so the head sculpt that bothers me. Everything else, I think, is fine. The tolerance on this guy are great. I understand, though, that they vary. Your copy's tolerances may not be as good as mine. Again, you may have a hard time getting to, drop his arms down to his size and stuff. I do have that issue with some of my Revelation figures. So just be aware of that. But I think the posability is great. It's right up there with, a Marvel Legends toy. It's got all the, the double bend knees and elbows and all that. I love the ball joint right there, mid-torso, to really give him that full range of motion. And overall, I think he looks really good. So, do I think you should get this guy? Well,
If you're collecting Revelation, then yeah, I mean, it's He-Man. How are you going to have a MOTU collection without He-Man? So if you're into Revelation, I'd say he's one of those must-haves. And he's still pretty easy to find, even though, we're already into like wave 3 in some places, at the time of recording this. So, you'll probably find him on clearance, honestly, at this point, since they tend to overflood the market with He-Man and Skeletor. So I would say as long as you could find him at or even below retail, I'd pick him up. I think he's a worthwhile figure. Maybe not my cup of tea when compared to something like the Classics He-Man toy, which was a little more in line with, the source material. But if you don't have that, I'd say he's a pretty good stand-in. Of course, that is just my take on this new He-Man. So now I want to know what you all think of him. Are you interested in this guy? Like, do you collect the Revelation stuff at all? Do you think he's, a good addition to that? What would you change about him if you could? Or are you not interested? You don't care about Revelation, or you don't like the design of this toy? Any and all feedback is always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at Masters of the Universe, Masterverse, Revelation, He-Man. And with all that said, I will see you next time.